Today on CityCast Boise, this time of year, it feels like goat heads are everywhere. In your bike tires, your shoes, even on your pet's paws. Murphy Woodhouse from the Mountain West News Bureau tells host Emma Arnold about new research that could help in the battle against this invasive plant. Plus, how to become a weed warrior in your own neighborhood. It's Monday, August 14th. I'm Frankie Barnhill, and this is what Boise's talking about.
Hi, Murphy. Welcome back to CityCast Boise.
Hello, great to be back.
So we're talking goat heads, which I hate. They absolutely suck. They pop bike tires. They get stuck in my dog's paws. Have you had goat heads ruin your day before?
Oh, yeah, for sure. The most prominent memory I have of goat heads is I grew up in southeast Idaho. Pocatello, and Moab was a place that we often went to for vacations. But I remember like one particular trip. I mean, we went to ride. Like that was the purpose. That's why we went. One of the mountain bike capitals of the country. And I just remember one trip. We literally were unable to ride over the course of like about a week or something like that. Just like goat heads every single day, flat. I mean, it just didn't work. So we didn't ride. I think anyone who rides in places where goat heads are present has a story like that to share.
Yeah, I rode my bike to school starting when I was like 10 here in Boise. And it was a constant battle as a kid. Like we tried everything. I did like the liners and the goo that you put in the tire, but pretty much every day or every other day I would have to come home and patch my bike tire. It was such an integral part of my childhood, patching my bike tire because of these awful, awful little weeds. So for anyone who has been blessed to not run into these little awful invasive plants before, can you quickly describe them?
Yeah, so I think like when people say goat heads, they're mostly referring to like the tiny little devils that like actually like get into your tires and pop your tires or you know get into your pet's paws. But I think like people are at least certainly I was before reporting this story are a little less familiar with like the plant itself, goat head, or it's also known as puncture vine. It's like a flat, snaking, viney, invasive plant, and it forms these thick mats, very low to the ground, right on the ground, and it has like small, very dense, almost like fern-like leaves.
Okay.
But like what makes them a problem are their fruits, which are these burrs that have, I think it's usually 5 lobes that eventually break into what are really called nutlets. That's the thing that is ruining your rides. And then each of those contains several seeds, and they can sprout in just the most. I mean, they like prefer harsh conditions. They like undeveloped, disturbed land, hot sun, places where a lot of plants struggle. And then they can also be viable for years. I've read like up to 7 years, like a seed can essentially be viable to ultimately sprout. So it's very much a worthy adversary. And I when I was out with the research, I described them as the xenomorphs of the plant world for sci-fi nerds out there.
That's so funny because when you said puncture vine, I thought that sounds like a sci-fi plant and like from a movie, like puncture vine. But also it is kind of a sci-fi plant because they really can grow anywhere and they can, like you said, the seeds can last forever. And they are everywhere around Boise, it seems like. Like I know it's not like we don't have any tools to fight them, but in the story you did for Boise State Public Radio, I was kind of surprised when you talked with a bunch of volunteers who go around and they just pull them up. Like, right? Like they just are yanking them up. Who are these angels that are doing this?
Yeah, so for part of the reporting, I went out with a group called the Weed Warriors, as I understand it. It's a formal City of Boise invasive plant removal effort. But I mean, while there are city staff out with those folks, that those are mostly volunteer led efforts. And yeah, when I was out, it was a group of it was about a half dozen folks, mostly older people, all of whom just like really have quite deep personal negative feelings about goat heads.
Is that effective? Like, is that the most effective method to just like go around and manually pull them? I mean, I'm not a big herbicide person. I'm glad to hear that they're not using a spraying a whole bunch in the foothills and stuff, but does that work?
Yeah. So one of the interesting things that I recall from what Trevor Coughlin, who's the BSU researcher whose work we're going to get into a little bit later, like while they feel just absolutely ubiquitous, when they actually like went out and looked for these, studied the abundance at randomized sites across the city, the vast majority. I mean, I think it was like it was a very small percentage of sites that actually had goat head presence. So while getting hand tools and yanking them out may seem like, like an uphill battle to say the least, they seem to think it works, and I certainly don't know the science that would contradict the effectiveness of that way of going about it.
Yeah, you mentioned this Boise State researcher that you talked to who made it his thing to study goat heads, but what is he studying exactly?
Yeah, so it's Trevor Coughlin. He's a biology professor at Boise State University. And so back in 2020, he and his lab needed something to work on. And the way that Trevor put it to me is, it's a plant that's causing a lot of harm to Boiseans, and Boiseans themselves clearly care a great deal about it. They generated random points across the city, developed little plots, and then we're just documenting rigorously the presence and absence of goat head. And one of the things they found, not terribly surprising, disturbed bare ground, that increases the abundance of the plant. Goat heads they like a hot, dusty patch of undeveloped disturbed ground. That's their thing. But I think the most important finding, certainly the one that I found most compelling, is that property values had the most potent impact on goat head abundance, and specifically the lower the property value, the more abundant the plant. And as Trevor and his team of co-authors emphasize, this presents some very serious equity implications that I think are really important to discuss.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because if lower property values correlate with higher likelihood of goat heads, what does that mean for the people who live in like goat head hotspots?
Yeah, this to me was just the most interesting part of Coughlin's work. Bicycles, they are an extremely efficient and affordable way to move around a city. But anyone who's dealt with goat heads knows how disheartening, but then also just like expensive. Like a new tube, that's like $7, and those can like really, really add up pretty quickly, especially when you're lower income. And so like a city is, or I think ought to be, a shared space. And I think it should be concerning to anyone who cares about equity that full access to it is possibly being compromised for our neighbors who depend on bicycles to get around. This finding, it raises the obvious question as to, why are lower property values associated with goat head abundance? They may be less prevalent in wealthier areas because residents just have more disposable income for yard maintenance, invasive weed removal, and landscaping, and that can deprive puncture vine. They also suggest that much of the local invasive plant removal work is done by volunteers, and the paper also notes that many volunteers tend to come from more privileged backgrounds, and as a result, that work could focus on higher income parts of the city. And I think that brings us to what I find makes this work like just very publicly relevant, is that in it they actually generated a publicly available goat head hotspot map. And so it's already being used to kind of help select sites for removal efforts. In a city like Boise, with the network of roads and trails that exist here, goat heads can get across the city in no time. And so if there are a goat head problem in one place is a goat head problem for all of us. So this is like really a shared situation. And if we're neglecting areas where they prevail, I mean, we're really just harming ourselves, in addition to all of the very serious equity issues that Trevor and his team have raised.
Are these weed warriors, are they using this research? Like, is it helping?
One of the student researchers, she kind of goes out and scouts promising places to send volunteers. Because, right, I mean, volunteer time is just like this precious resource, right? And so, yeah, she'll go out, find places where there's work to be done, and then kind of it's almost like send the forces here, like this is the spot, right? I mean, this is something that can be replicated kind of really anywhere where goat heads are present, and in fact there has been some interest from other researchers who see exactly that promise, like basically the promise of being able to more just effectively target scarce volunteer time, right? I mean, you only have so many hours from volunteers to work with.
And, you know, of course, we have the annual Goathead Fest coming up, which is where the Boise Bicycle Project they've like playfully reclaimed the goat head and used the event to raise like awareness about the weed. Do you think you'll go, or like does the name of it kind of turn you off at all now that you've done this story?
Oh, I mean, so I've never been before, but, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, seeing as I've made bicycle enthusiasm, 30 to 50% of my local brand, I think it'd probably be a pretty weird thing for me to
Yeah, you can't skip
miss.
this. I think you can't skip it. Maybe we can make you a paper mache goat head costume to wear, is what I'm thinking.
Not committing.
Well, it feels like our hatred of goat heads is really something all of Boise can get behind. Maybe the one thing we can all agree on.
For sure. And one thing that I will say, I mean, like all of us have, we figured out one way or another to live with goat head. One thing that has worked for me, and I know that other people do, I've always been too lazy to fully convert to tubeless tires. But what I do is I actually just put the sealant in my tubes. And that seems to have served me fairly well. I mean, some people may have some different thoughts about that, but that seems to work reasonably well.
All right, Murphy, thanks for the tip, and we can't wait to talk to you again soon.
Love coming on. Thanks again, Emma.
Before you head out, here's the deets on Boise Goathead Fest this weekend. It starts Saturday at 11 in the morning with a bike parade. If you want to check it out, meet at Cecil Andrus Park by the Capitol a little before 11 to get settled in. The party really gets started at the stage at noon and ends at 5 with music, dancing, Lost Grove beer, and, of course, bikes. We'll put a link in the show notes to register for the free event ahead of time. Okay, that's all for today here on CityCast Boise. Did you know that we have a sister newsletter? Subscribe to Hey Boise for a daily dose of news, culture, and events. Emma will be back in the host chair tomorrow. See you then.